Hello, my friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Running Explained podcast. I am your host, Coach Elizabeth, and this week we are talking about one of the most underrated performance tools that you have in your training toolbox: sleep. I know. Not just about getting enough sleep, but what it's actually doing for your body, your recovery, and your ability to handle all of the work that you are putting in. My guest this week to talk about all of these things is Dr. Logan Sherman, sports chiropractor, former sub-elite marathoner, and chairman of the BMW Dallas Marathon. He is someone who not just coaches and works with runners, he of course is a runner, and he gets what it's like to balance super high level training with recovery, work, family, and life, and how to make it work for the season of life that you're currently in. So in this conversation, we talk about what quality sleep actually means, so quality versus quantity, how to use your wearable data to help you get enough sleep without losing your mind in the process, why your sleep might be trash when you're in a super heavy period of training, and actually what that can tell you about what's going on inside your body, and how to reframe those off days when you aren't getting enough sleep or you have to modify your training to stop blaming yourself and train in a way that actually helps you keep getting better. So it's all the real talk, all the how to apply this to real world situations type of episode, and helps you understand how important sleep actually is, but how to make it work for you. Let's dive in. Dr. Logan Sherman, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us, Dr. Logan Sherman, who are you?
So I'm a sports chiropractor here in Dallas. I've owned a couple of clinics and I've enjoyed working with the running population. I've been a runner pretty much my whole life. I was a little overweight kid growing up and picked up running, and it changed my life from grades to, making it to college and obviously choosing the career path I'm in. And currently I stand as chairman of the BMW Dallas Marathon, a race that has been a big part of my life for a long, long time. I mean, when I was a kid in high school, ran the relay. I won the half marathon 3 times and the full marathon 1 time. And I can't run as fast as I used to. So now I help others cross our finish line, which is a very rewarding experience, along with the volunteer board we have and the countless volunteers we have.
Well, before we get started and talk about our big thing, which is sleep and how to make it work for you as a
Very
runner,
important.
I would love to know, briefly tell us, how did you become a runner? I know you've been running for a long, long time, but how did you get started?
My father was a big runner, and so he had a huge, influence on me growing up, and it was a great way for us to connect. But I actually grew up a little overweight. My nickname in middle school, all the way up to middle school, was Jelly Roll, and so I I took on running as a way to connect with my father in middle school. Actually, I got in trouble in PE, and the PE teacher was like, "Hey, you got to either run 2 miles during the next PE session, or you're going to go to detention." And so I get to PE the next day, and I'm so upset about what transpired, and I don't want my parents to find out that I got a detention. So I run 2 miles, and it had impressed him. And so he said, "I need to tell your dad, because we got to put you in track now." And so, so that Coach Holiday is really who I owe a lot of my, you know, the early finding of my potential to. So getting in trouble in PE, it's not. I wouldn't recommend it, but it bode well in my case.
And it sounds like, so you ran through college. Tell us just a little bit about your running journey.
So I ran through high school, set a couple of state meet records here in Texas, and then went to Texas A&M, and I ran 5 years. I redshirted a few of the seasons up there, because you go from high school, which is really fall, spring, to college, which is you got fall, you got cross country, and then you go straight into indoor track, and then you go straight into outdoor track. So it ends up being a very long season when you get to college, but a lot of fun. Traveled a lot to see a lot of different places in the U.S. when I was there. My big passion was always it came to the Dallas Marathon. I won the half marathon when I was in high school, and I always wanted to run the full marathon. And I had a lot of my peers that had won before that kept pulling me back a little bit and saying, "Hey, you need to build some years of quality running before you throw a marathon under your legs." And they were right. I think I made my first attempt when I was about 24, 25, versus what I would have loved to have done, which was when I was 18. But they were right. Building that engine and being able to kind of get everything from mind, body right, to be able to do my first full. And so when I stepped out of A&M, that was the first thing I went for. And I think I actually did a lot better post collegiately, from a career aspect. I ran real well in college. I ran 29:40 for a 10K, 14, 14 low for 5K. People always talked about me being like a tank. Just, you just kind of get me on the rails and let me go at a certain pace, and I'll stay with it. So I loved marathoning. I think just going over and seeing cities the way you get to see you don't get to see them, driving in a car like you do when you're on foot. So I think it's been a fun way to explore the U.S. and different countries.
I'm going to take a hard swerve because I have just a question because of your professional capacity as a sports chiropractor and how popular, even more popular running is becoming now. And we're seeing younger and younger people enter endurance like marathons and signed up for marathons and half marathons. You waited to run your first marathon, even as a very serious runner. Are you seeing more adolescents running longer distances now?
Yeah, we are. A lot of the statistics that are coming out are showing that a lot of younger people are running marathons, and taking that step at an earlier age, whether that be halves or fulls. Um, and I think that's it's amazing. I think this generation of runners, and where it can continue to go is phenomenal. I mean, I was reading, one of my buddies wrote a book about marketing to Gen Zers, and I wanted to read it and see kind of what this whole thing was, because we know per a recent study that 20% of marathon finishers in 2024 were Gen Z females. And I go back and I look at Dallas Marathon finish line. I'm like, that adds up. I mean, there's a lot of younger people coming to the sport, and I think that's phenomenal. And he in his book, I think verbatim said this. He said, so long are the days where people are going out on a Sunday and doing this brunch, and having a few cocktails or whatever, and food, and people are going to yoga class or Pilates, and they're having their smoothie drinks, and they're meeting up with their training groups, and I think that's a way healthier lifestyle. And now that I'm almost 40, I think I would have benefited a lot more from sleep and recovery, and then going out and having a burger on a Sunday morning. So.
Well, that I think is a good segue into our conversation on sleep. But before we get going, I have 3 quick get to know you questions that I'd love to hear your answers on. And the first one is, if you could have an all expenses paid guaranteed entry into any race in the entire world, what would you choose?
Oh man. Before I stopped running competitively, I always wanted to do Western States, and I know that's one that a lot of people talk about. But I was running, relatively competitively, and then I actually did a fundraiser, a 12-hour treadmill fundraiser, and I think we covered about 85 miles on the treadmill in about 12 hours. And to that point, that was where I wanted to kind of start turning and going towards trail racing. But yeah, I would love to do Western States and go see that part of the world. I think that's just a beautiful spot.
And these days, I have to know, what are you taking with you on your runs for fueling?
Uh, I like to call myself the retired runner, so I don't take as much fueling on my runs right now. Obviously, I live in Texas, and so the summer, the rehydration. I've been doing a lot of Spark. I've been doing a lot of Element. Those are the things I use to replenish. But most of my runs right now are relatively short in comparison to the 100, 110 miles a week. So I was doing. So right now I'm putting probably 40 miles a week max. I got two little kids, so anytime I can eat their mac and cheese and their goldfish, that's my refuel.
Right. Yeah. Can't get around the time commitment of endurance sports. And when your
Yeah,
time is taken up by other things, something has to give.
yeah.
Can I ask you, when you were running competitively, what was your preferred run fuel?
When I was running competitive, this is a unique thing. I always love talking about it because I do think people are gravitating towards this. I actually didn't take a lot of fuel during most of my training runs. I always wanted to kind of get a little bit better understanding of where I was from an energy supply, aspect. And so I always tell people, BMW is our primary sponsor for the BMW Dallas Marathon, but it's almost like you throw in a towel over the dash and you can't really tell where your fuel level is, but you just want to know by feel kind of where it is. And so most of my training runs I would do without water, without goos or anything like that. But most of the time during racing, back then there wasn't a whole bunch of options like there are today. So I mean, it was primarily goo, which bode well for me during races. And it's one of those big what ifs. If I could go back and do it again, and I were to probably put a little bit more emphasis on nutrition, could the training runs have been better? Could the recovery have been better? And could I have gotten a little bit more out of my training versus the way I did it? But my thought process back in the day was just, hey, let's see where that, if we can kind of gauge where we need to start taking fueling. And most of the time I was fine on that. But like I said, I think the biggest thing is you should probably be fueling on a lot of that stuff, which is something I missed out on.
That's a fascinating exercise. And yes, of course, like, yeah, we know fueling probably helps, but to have an understanding of what it feels like to be at different stages of depletion, that's an excellent tool to have for when you're racing.
Yeah, I mean it's and to go by feel, because I think a lot of times most people are like, hey, I'm going to go, at mile 3 I'm going to take something, and mile 7 I'm going to take something, and they go off of these preconceived ideas of where they need to be. But you know, as humans, we're dynamic. I mean, so we change on any given day based on what we ate, how we slept, our amount of stress, and so we don't know really. You never know until you get to that point. And if you go by feel, I think it really helps you, understand your body, understand what's going on, and it kind of gets you a little bit more in tune to what's going on underneath that dashboard, under that towel that we kind of used earlier. I always thought that was just a fun, fascinating way. But I mean, I'm sure we're going to talk about it here in a little bit. But I mean, back in the bulk of my training, I remember getting up in the morning, just doing a kind of a simple heart rate, just check the pulse, carotid, and seeing what it was. And if it was elevated, and I didn't feel like I had a hard workout in me, I'd kind of come back down. Now we got Whoops, and we got Oura rings, and we got Garmin watches, and all these devices that I think are really fine tuning our aspects of trainings. And I think people, you're seeing it. I mean, you're seeing these times are getting faster and faster. The Olympic trials standards just came out. The men's are dropping by 2 minutes. The women's were already dropped astronomically 4 years ago. So I think we're seeing that people are taking advantage of understanding, what the body truly needs from a recovery aspect.
And my final get to know you question, thinking back of all the shoes you've ever run in, what has been your all-time favorite? Oh, those were the magic shoes.
Oh man, I love Nike had a shoe out a long time ago. It was the Nike Tempos. You know, and a disclaimer here, I got out of competitive racing before all the Nike Fly, the Zoom Flies and the carbon plated shoes came out. And so this was just a simple shoe. It looked like it was made from, a waffle iron on the bottom, and they didn't last very long. In fact, sometimes the glue would come unlaminated and it would start popping out. And but it was a very comfortable fast shoe, and at the time it was just state of the art. And it's funny to kind of think, what was state of the art for, just a short blimp of the radar has now been far surpassed by all the shoes out there. I mean, I could tell you even some of the heavier training shoes probably way, way surpassed that shoe, but that was one. I mean, I stocked up closets full of those. And then I realized the glue didn't last as long, so
Yes, yeah,
that
that
was
will
a problem.
deteriorate. I mean, it's every so often you don't see it as much anymore though, but I've definitely seen, races from say back in the day where this tongue of like somebody's shoe is like flapping, because it's literally coming undone, but you're
Oh
not
yeah.
going to stop.
Oh no, you can't.
Yeah.
You just keep going. Hope the blister's not that bad.
So today we're talking about sleep and the importance of sleep for, yes, okay, it's really good for your health. Cool. We understand that. But it's also really good for us and from a performance aspect for us to be able to handle our training. And obviously, I think as we age, we all start to pay more attention to that. How can I become more resilient? How can I focus more on recovery? When did you first focus on these other things like sleep, not just got to go out and get my workout in?
I think probably my first realization was in high school. I mean, I think there was so much, at a young age that these young runners there's so much, room for error on the side, which things don't matter. But as we age, that shoulder of the road gets narrower and narrower, and it kind of blends into the road. And so your 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 areas for improvement really come from not just the running, but what you can do outside. And so for me, my first was realization of this was as a senior in high school, and my coach would say jump, and I'd just say how high you want me to go, and I'll go a couple more meters. But it was one of those. He would put 100 miles, 110 miles on the summer, and sometimes I would deviate and go up a little bit above that. And it's just one of those things that I learned from. But unfortunately, over that summer, just pushing my body, the heat of the summer, and then being in high school and wanting to be out with my friends for movies and late dinners and et cetera, et cetera. We unfortunately I ended up getting mono, and so September, I remember being like, oh man, I got a sore throat. It's one of the second meets of the year. It was at Texas A&M, running a cross country meet, and uh, really started to struggle, and that just tanked that whole season. But that probably, from then I realized, oh man, these other things, what I eat, what I put in my body, how much sleep I get, are really going to be real important if I want to maintain that high mileage and be able to peak where I'm at. And unfortunately, those are things that we learn through trial and error. I mean, that most of us are, running. I always say you're going to run up to, you want to kind of be on that side of that fence. And if you go too far to one side, you might get injured, or something might happen. But if you don't push yourself hard enough, you don't know if you're going to reach your full potential.
What is the role that sleep plays? I mean, I think we do a really good job of saying, we have to recover really well and focus on recovery and make sure you have training balance. But, you know, I because we all sleep every day, most days, it feels like something that we know is important because we have to sleep, but we don't, I think, always pay it the respect and understanding that it deserves. So, like, why do we sleep? Why do we need to sleep? And why is enough sleep so important?
I think the important thing to delineate is quality sleep. And so, a lot of us are probably just not getting great quality sleep either. But sleep is important because it's regenerative, and it helps our bodies rebuild and recover. It helps our minds recover. And ultimately, you're only as strong as what your mind is. If you're going out and doing a workout after a late concert, that even though you feel like you could probably push through, your mind might say, hey, this is getting tough. Let's go ahead and stop at eight sets instead of 10, or et cetera, et cetera. But sleep really does a lot to quality sleep, and by affecting the pituitary and the hypothalamus, how we release hormones and how those hormones recover and help us rebuild. Those are all really important pieces from, from a hormonal, from a biochemical aspect. But us being able to sleep and for our nerve and our nervous system to be able to kind of shut down, to me, that's one of the biggest things. It's almost like, you and I are both sitting here on our computers. If we have our computer going at a high CPU the whole time and it's just go, 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 well, eventually you're going to start to see it lag and lag and lag and lag. And then it kind of gets to a point where we're like, oh, we should probably, restart it or let it sit off for a little bit. And I think that's just it's human nature. We just kind of push, until we say no. And same thing as hydration. Once your body's saying, hey, I'm tired, it's a little late. And so I think that's a really important piece. And I think getting blue lights, this is one thing we've really worked on in our household is really, we've got two little ones, so the phone's always somewhat near, but we usually have the phone on the charger face down, and then it's pretty much books 30 minutes out, no TVs, screens we try to kind of get rid of and delay that time, because I really think the blue light that's emitted from that can be problematic, more from a pituitary hypothalamus area.
Obviously, waking up in the morning after a poor night of sleep, whether that's not enough sleep or just not good enough quality sleep, we've all been waking up early and say, okay, well, last night wasn't great, but I have this workout on my schedule. I have to go do this. How would you approach making that decision about what to proceed with in your workout? And how much do you adjust? Something I always like to let my runners know is like, you can, if you need to adjust anything, like you can scale back, you can pull back, you can slow down, like it doesn't matter, especially if you've had a bad night of sleep. But like 99 times out of 100, everybody just kind of tries to do it as written. But how would you go about assessing if you needed to modify something given how you slept the night before?
What would I tell somebody to do, or what would I do?
What would you tell somebody to do?
And as I said earlier, I mean, it is really one of those things I've learned a lot more to listen to. And I think being able to understand, hey, this is a busy week in the grand scheme of things. The training, are we on a mesocycle? Are we on a microcycle? Where can we start to balance out some of the training? To be honest with you, a lot of those runs, the way I set it up with most people is only 20% of your runs are hard, 80% are easy. And so if it is on a workout day and, hey, I can get some more sleep tonight because I don't have a work deadline, or, the kids are going to be tired because they had swim lessons or whatever, I'll continue on with the workout as written. But if it's one of those where, man, this is a busy week, we got kids graduating, we've got, this kid's birthday party and, et cetera, I think those are really important things for you to understand how much you should dial back and talk to your coach or talk to whoever's writing your program. I mean, it's one of those things where we can change training slightly, week to week, and be able to kind of recover enough to make the next workout better. But if you are starting to see yourself, have issues and you keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and it starts to draw from each workout in a global nature, that's when we become, we start having problems with the trajectory of where the training is going to take somebody.
Something that I feel like I see a lot, and I do this myself, is that we don't want to admit that we can't do something or that maybe we shouldn't do something because of reasons, right? And then oftentimes I find that if performance ends up being slightly below where we wanted it to be, it's self-blame. I suck, this sucks. And so much of what I think understanding how your performance evolves is understanding what influences it. And that goes to sleep quality as well. But that's a very, sorry, I just kicked my desk. That's a very natural thing too, right? To say, oh my God, I don't want to admit that I can't handle this workout. And then when it goes poorly, I'm just going to blame myself. Like, why are we like this?
Oh, I mean, that negative self-talk when you're tired is huge. And you look at people when they do these, 100 milers or, these ultra races. I mean, or you take somebody that's walking and running their first 5K. I mean, there are so many instances when you're tired, you let these negative thoughts kind of bombard your processing and your level of thinking. And I think understanding that's okay, and that's part of the process, and that's going to happen. I can tell you, every marathon I ran, there was some part of me that was like, oh man, it would be easy to stop, right now, or I'm hurting a little bit, let me just go ahead and pull over real quick. But if we realize there are some highs and lows, and that you can kind of use these mantras or these positive self-talks, and one of the reasons that happens is because our brain, a lot of times we actually have to actively inhibit negative thoughts. And when you get tired, you don't have sleep, or you're in the middle of a long run, it's hot outside, these negative thoughts actually reach the cortex, and then, I mean, they're in the cortex, but they reach the processing part of the cortex, and they start to affect you, elsewhere, and then you start to kind of shut down. And so I think talking yourself through positive wins, and I'm a real big fan of, hey, if you're hurting a lot, all you got to worry about is the next couple of steps, and then I have the next couple of steps after that, and that's all we have to do. It doesn't matter if you're running or you got a big project for work coming up, step by step, and just, giving yourself a pat on the back for a couple of wins is always a positive.
What do you think a normal change in your sleep need or sleep habits would be as you would progress through a training cycle?
I think early on, when you start to initiate the activity, it's almost like, a refrigerator turning on. It turns, it needs an enormous amount of power at the very beginning, and then it kind of starts to taper off. But then as you kind of get into the bulk of your training, you'll probably need a little bit more sleep. And I certainly think most people tend to pull sleep away when they get into that taper. And that's the last thing you really want to do. Because some of us want to just fill that extra time with active activity. And it's really a time for your body just to kind of recover mentally and physically. One, so you don't get sick, and two, just so that you can have the energy when that race day comes. And so I generally say, kind of a lot of sleep is required at the very beginning. One, it just sets the precedent for the whole training cycle that, hey, I'm going to focus on these small things, going to the gym and doing my glute strength, you know, eating the right food, going to bed at the right time, getting up and focusing on crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's. And my college coach was really big into the devil's in the details. And I love that saying. I mean, I was, I heard it so much, I didn't like it in college, but it's really true. Setting these things early on in your programming can really help you, so that you maintain some good high level consistency and the important things that need to happen to make sure you get through the entire training program.
And when you say a lot of sleep or more sleep, I know there's the general recommendations of how much sleep we should all be getting, but what do you have that recommendation as?
I think most people should be close to 8 to 9 hours. I mean, there are some people that can function off of 4 or 5. I mean, I just a lot of people that come into my office, and I can look at their Whoop data, and they're totally fine. I would generally say most people should be probably closer to 8 or 9. Um, and you look at our evenings. I talk to my friends and how we're all spending it, on shows trying to catch up with something, and I think it's pretty easy to come about, just by putting down the phone and picking up a book or something like that. Like I said earlier, just getting away from screens. Um, I mean, I can be honest with you now. I probably went to bed a little later early on, but now that I got to read a book in bed with my kids, I'm usually guaranteed to be asleep by like 8:40. Um, One of my kids right next to me, and I tell you, my energy as far as like productivity and everything has been up. And I'm an early morning person. I usually go to bed, you know, if I can get the kids to sleep and not fall asleep. I can usually go to bed around 9:30 or 10, but I'm usually probably up about 4:30 or 5. And that's just a productive time for me.
I hear from parents, I do not have children of my own, but I hear from parents all the time about the struggles of getting enough sleep. It kind of no matter what phase they're in until they become more self-sufficient, your sleep is impacted in some way. And I'll be honest, I understand this, but sometimes the reaction I hear from people is that they get angry at the recommendations for sleep. Like, yeah, 8 to 9 hours per sleep of sleep per night is I that's decadent. That's a lot for some people. And I'll be curious about your experience as a parent in this context, and also if you've experienced other people be, let's say, a bit touchy about the subject of maybe they're not getting enough sleep for their needs.
Yeah, I think the first line for most people is to be a little defensive on it, and kind of upset, and where can they fill in the time? But I do feel like productivity, and when I look at myself for not getting sleep, it's usually when I'm not making the best use of my time. And so I think the phase that you mentioned it really well, with these kids, I love it. I mean, I like just the groundedness of being able to put away my phone. I get busy weeks, with work and, being chairman of the marathon, being on another board. Um, but if I can come home and be like, man, I got just a small window with these kids here, I need to be present. And when I can put stuff down, as funny as it says, maybe stuff builds up for me to do in the morning, but it definitely gives me a little bit of time with the kids, and then I just sleep better because I've had that wind down time without screens and books, and just kind of building off of that imagination that they have. It's funny you say that, because I had one of my board members on a different board ask me, why don't I run? And I told them, I was like, I did everything I wanted to do. I mean, my biggest dream, my bucket list was to win Dallas Marathon, and I was able to get that. And when you have kids, your training can't be as it can't be 100% perfect. Um, your life is focused on other things, just as like if you don't have kids, your life is focused on your animals or your work or your job. And so when we get older, or as we get older, that's one of those things that you just have to refocus and readjust to. And to me, that also is a lot of fun. If we can have the ability to adjust, most of us aren't getting paid to do this sport. And so we're out there because we love doing it. We love competing. We love seeing our friends, and we love the socialization of it. And to me, having another, challenge or an aspect to really think about, really kind of ground you a little bit more.
Have you always been a good sleeper? Have you ever struggled with insomnia?
I do at times when I'm very stressed. I can tell you, when I opened my office, my chiropractic office, I mean, there was probably, I would venture to say it was about 2 months where I wouldn't sleep through the night. And there's definitely times now where I get up and, I usually try to use that time to be productive. I mean, I just had something a couple of weeks ago. I was worried about something over the weekend, and, get up and fold laundry, and, you know, catch up on some good books. It's just, I feel really sad for people that struggle with insomnia. I mean, I think that's a very difficult thing, um, because it really can impact you. When you, as we discussed earlier, if you have negative thoughts, or you're just you kind of get in your own mind about why you're not sleeping and whatever's keeping you up, and those things really kind of weigh heavily on people. And I hope that people find an outlet, and that they're able to kind of get, whether that be a mental health professional, or whether that be a some type of stress relief. The nice thing about running is I do feel like it usually kind of tires you out a little bit, and it allows you to kind of get that mental release, whatever stressor might be there. And so, luckily, anytime I've had difficulty with insomnia, I've usually can go to running to kind of help me sort out something. But definitely something I'm sure some of these listeners have that they struggle with.
Yeah, and the reason I ask is everybody has a different, I think, relationship with sleep, and I found so I mean I've always had not trouble sleeping. I'm the person even from a very young age where I just kind of didn't want the day to end, so I would just stay up. And I'm naturally an evening person, not a morning person. But something I have noticed through periods of having terrible sleep hygiene and then better sleep hygiene, just like anything else I found, is that you really have to stay on top of it. For me, when I'm going through periods of like, wow, I feel like I'm sleeping so well, my sleep routine's really great, like all things, sometimes when things are going really well, we start to let things get a little bit loose. And then I realize, oh my God, I'm up playing Candy Crush till 2 a.m. This is not okay. We need to refocus, reset. But oftentimes we go through this, oh, I've just fixed this thing. It's fixed forever. I never have to think about it again. But sleep hygiene, and just like all the things we do in our training, it's just like that. It's frustrating to have to keep doing it, but it does take some work sometimes.
Absolutely. I mean, to stay into that routine, and that routine sometimes has blimps, whether you're traveling or life stresses and all that stuff impacts it. And so just trying to get grounded as fast as possible is really, really important, obviously.
Thinking about the wearable data that we have these days, what are some of the metrics? Like you said, you looked at somebody's Whoop data. I know I have my Coros watch that I wear and have it track my sleep. What are the metrics that you're looking at when you are assessing somebody's sleep quality on a wearable device?
I usually look at HRV, which is something that we looked at a lot in chiropractic school. That was one of those things that we discussed as far as the recovery aspect, and that was kind of the beginning part. But that's obviously what most of these
Talk more
devices
about
become.
that. We haven't talked about HRV that much on the show. Explain what HRV is.
HRV is heart rate variability, and so going from the way we used to measure it is, you kind of sit still, see what your resting heart rate is. You'd get up and you'd do exercises going over a step for about a minute, and then you'd come back down, and you'd see how quickly that takes for that heart rate to get back down to your pre-exercise cadence. And so being able to recover faster shows us that your heart rate has the variability of where it's going to come back down a lot sooner. And so that you basically, it's a sign of multiple things. One, blood vessel elasticity, heart, obviously your heart rate, how much you're pumping, the efficiency there. And so you really want to see that number, you want to see it come down relatively quickly for somebody that's in good fitness. And so heart rate variability, and then so I did a neuro study under one of my mentors, and he was really big in breath rate. Now, some of these devices do that and some don't, but you're able to tell how much oxygen demand your body needs, and whether which heart, breathing affects your acidity level, and your pH value of the body. And so being able to see where you're at there, if you're breathing heavily, there's been a lot of times where I've seen that that's a problem on my aspect, and shortly after, a couple of days later, I'll end up with some type of sickness, whether that be flu or just a cold or something like that. And so I think those things are really pivotal in what I'll look at. I don't love looking at data every single day. It's almost like the best comparison I have is we bought our house, has a pool. Somebody was like, do not go out there every single day and take the pool chemistry. It just varies so much. But find a consistent time and look at it, and be able to kind of extrapolate that data. And maybe if you have a device, you're not looking at it first thing in the morning every morning, but you might take it and look at it a few days a week, and then you compare the relative points through there. Because I think you'll see there can be a lot of things to be stressed out about, but there are a lot of things you can point those factors to, whether you just didn't get a good night's sleep, it was too hot in the house, the AC didn't work, dogs were barking and had to go to the bathroom, et cetera, et cetera. But those are things that I usually tell people, the fact that we can look at these wearables now, you don't need to make those an added stressor. take those and understand that it's just good information to get, but don't make it, hey, I gotta live or die by what this device says, you know, because eventually you're going to have a race day and you're going to look at it race morning and it's going to say, hey, you're only 50% recovered. Well, you got to go out and race here in a couple hours. So, just make sure that you kind of wrap your mind around that. It is okay if the device says that you aren't fully recovered for X, Y, Z, but understand that there are some factors that you can go in there and control on top of it. My brother-in-law is a prime example of not a huge runner, but he likes to be active and be fit, and he got the Aura ring, and it changed his life as far as he factors in how much sleep he's going to get, if he's going to go out with friends, like what time he cuts that out, because he actually likes to compete against people and make sure his score is better than others. But it's his competitive spirit coming out. But I think those are things that I tell most people, obviously be conscious of, but don't really let that get into your head or be another added stressor to what you're trying to do.
The interesting thing that I found with the data, the metrics, is that you also need enough data points to understand what abnormal is.
Mm-hmm.
And I love what you said earlier about, as we age, essentially the shoulder, we are less resilient, right? That our ability to kind of go all over the, road narrows and our resilience decreases. But just because, if you have 6 great nights of sleep and 1 terrible night of sleep, everybody's going to focus on how everything's quote unquote ruined from that bad night of sleep. But like, you should probably still be resilient enough to handle 1 bad night of sleep, and like you'll be fine.
Absolutely. And I think that's just one of those things that, we just, if you didn't have the device, you would have just chalked it up to, hey, I feel a little tired. But there is a total win in being like, oh man, I crushed this workout, even though my data said that it didn't look great. So, and I think we all need to have a great, flourishing, vibrant social life, because I think that's, a bigger part of who we are. And so, if you do have a late night when you're going to go see an opening of a movie on a Thursday night and you got a big run on Saturday, it's okay. Your body will get through it, and just try to kind of catch up when you can.
If you're working with somebody and they're describing a recent onset of poor sleep, right? I'm waking up in the middle of the night, my sleep quality is really bad, I'm not getting enough sleep. What might that tell you? Like, how can we use sleep as a starting point for understanding if there's something else that we need to pay attention to?
Usually I'll kind of ask people in the office, I'll say, did anything change in your training? Did your training go up dramatically? If it did, that can be a factor. A lot of times you'll have increased cortisol, which will decrease some of your sleep when you start doing your training program. I'll usually ask them if there's been any big life events that has occurred, any travel. Those are big things. A lot of times beds, there are super small things that people don't really think about. Did they change beds, or they change pillows? One of those could be a real big impact of how much sleep they're getting. But I think trying to find generally if anything has changed, and then you can go all the way down to really small stuff. Did your diet change? Did you change anything supplement wise? Did any medicine that your primary got you on? And look at those small things. And usually you'll find some type of issue, whether it be some external event or whether it be some type of thing that they have changed internally, whether that be, their routine or whatnot. And we'll identify, hey, we'll let it go for a little bit, and on a follow-up in 2, 3, 4 weeks, if they're still having trouble sleeping, then we'll try to revisit what it is. But usually most of the time, if we get, our sleep kind of gets knocked off for, usually I say max 4 or 5 days, and really not a week, that's really where we need to kind of start identifying some other factors.
The hormonal impact on sleep quality is incredible. I remember after I ran my first marathon, I thought, I'm going to sleep so well tonight. And
Nope.
I slept so badly. I was so tired and I could not fall asleep. And because I was just jacked, I was just wired. Like my body was so exhausted from what I'd done. And so that was a little bit of a, oh, okay. I think I get it now.
Yeah, no, it's that is one of those hard things. You get just such a high, and it could be a workout, it could be a great race, it could be a bad race, but no matter what, you're in your head kind of thinking about that event, and cortisol really messes with a lot of people's sleep. One of my favorite books in chiropractic school was Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, and it really talks about how human society, we are bombarded by an enormous amount of stress responses, whether that be us sit in our car and drive, across the city to go see a friend or a doctor's appointment, but sitting in traffic and dealing with all these external factors, we're in this heightened stress response. And if your cortisol, if your adrenal cortex is just skyrocketed all day, it's really hard for that to kind of shake out. And when you go to bed, it's sitting there, and it kind of goes back to what we were talking about, the hormonal imbalance, and so how that affects, upregulation of everything else. That's going to be a big impact on, your recovery and your ability to kind of get some sleep, so that these things cycle, is basically what I'm saying. And so that's where people have a lot of trouble, is that continual cycle and trying to kind of down regulate everything.
That's so hard though, right? Because unless you're about to go build a cabin in the middle of the woods, we have to live in this modern world. We have to navigate all the, dopamine blasts and all the stressors. It's really hard. And I think that feeling like everybody else is handling it except for you, I think we all feel that way sometimes. We all struggle with that to some degree.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that means it's just part of the world we live in, and understanding that it is okay not to be in control. It's okay to let go and not have everything fall into place. And that's just the reality of it. But one of my best friends from growing up, he qualified for the Olympic trials, and he did the coolest thing. Talking about going to the woods, he went to a very remote spot in Texas, into a cabin, and trained for the last 6 weeks of his training before the Houston Olympic trials. And I went down there with him. It was the coolest thing to be. Paper books, didn't have great, Wi-Fi service or internet. And so he wasn't on his phone all the time, but he was running a couple of times a day and getting away from the stressors. Definitely not something most most of these listeners can do.
Yeah.
But it, it did really, it's one of those things that, just we have to live with the world around us, and we have to kind of fit into the environment that we have. And it is totally okay to be, off for a little bit, but trying to find your way back to some type of normalcy is really important. And that's what we are as humans, is we're constantly, the homeostatic value is always going up and down and up and down. But if you take a general snapshot, like we talked about doing of the pool, you should be able to see kind of how that's a linear growth. And so, training, same thing. Most people will ramp up, and if they don't kind of come back down for some recovery, then usually they'll get injured and then they'll fall, and that'll be detrimental. And so, again, understanding that as long as the marks are going into the general incline, that's good. But you definitely are going to see some ebbs and flows here, through the course of your training, whether that be sleep or whether that be injuries.
Speaking of injury, obviously you are a chiropractor and you have your own practice. Talk to us about the role of sleep with injury recovery.
Oh, massive. And so most of the people that I see, well, I would say a lot of people that are coming in here during taper are, they're taking away from their sleep because they're not as tired, because they haven't done as much. And so they're filling time. And so, those are the people that are, unfortunately a little bit banged up. But I certainly think with the tissue recovery aspect of things, sleep is the most important thing. Um, and I talk to a lot of people about it. It's like almost the more sleep you get, the faster that healing rate gets. Um, and I think one, you're deloading tissue, you're not stressing it out as much. But I think for us to build, enough, you know, of the body to regenerate and heal, sleeping is extremely important. Um, Trying to think of a good example of somebody. Um,
Well, I'll use my own personal experience with some anecdotal and data. I have noticed that when I can essentially sleep as much as I want to, then I can handle way more training than when I am more limited in my ability to sleep. Like it's astonishing how much of an impact that has.
yeah, I mean, the ability to load the body a lot more, is astronomical versus if you're not sleeping enough, you put that same amount of load on it, and then unfortunately you'll end up with an injury. One, because of the fatigue and everything, and how that body will not absorb the shock through the natural gate, and you fatigue a lot earlier. And so instead of you running 20 miles and kind of breaking down, you might be at 15 miles and you might have that same breakdown process that you would expect on a well-rested body versus a sleep deprived body.
So thinking about, balancing high training load with high sleep needs, if you were to, I know obviously you're not running competitively anymore, but if you were to say, all right, you know what, this is the year I'm going to go back to running 100 miles per week in your life as a business owner, as a spouse, and as a parent, what are some things that would look different now in your training and your recovery than how you used to do it?
You know, I think the big thing is I'd probably take one day off. I used to run 7 days a week, and like the shortest run would be 12 miles. And so I think for sure, without a doubt, now I would focus a little bit more on that recovery and try to sleep. Um,
Can I ask you quickly how long 12 miles would take you to run?
Back then, it would probably take, probably about an hour, 5 hour, 10. Most everything I ran was pretty close to 6 or just slightly under. And
I
it,
always like to highlight that because I think people hear the distance and they go, "Oh my god!" and they realize you're running so fast for your fitness level that at a comfortable run, an hour and change,
yeah,
so
it's
a
but
quote unquote normal training load, he's just covering more distance.
it's funny because somebody was saying something the other day, or maybe it was in my mind. I was like, oh yeah, like I'll run. I needed to do something. I was going to train for a half, and I was going to run 12, and I was like, it should just take me like an hour and 10 or max. And I'm like out there, and it was like an hour 20, hour 30, and I'm like, oh man, and I'm tired. So yeah, totally different. And that's one of the blessings about being sub elite is you go out for a 2 hour run, you can knock out 20 miles on a Saturday. I am completely amazed, the how much running has opened my eyes, and certainly being more being chairman of the Dallas Marathon, just the fact that there are so many people that spend a lot longer than I spent, to get them where they are. And when you see somebody that is walking and completing and finishing, our last few finishers are ecstatic and they are so grateful for the whole process. And I think the people that are doing that are to me true heroes, because I mean they're really spending a lot of time and a lot of energy, and they're doing stuff that is extremely life changing for them and their families.
I want to ask you just a little bit about that, because yes, I agree with you. And I've heard, I'm not a sub elite runner by any means, but I've heard other elite and sub elite runners share something very similar, right? Yes, I can cover more distance in less time. And I am absolutely in awe of people who are out there for 4, 5, 6+ hours. And I think sometimes people think it's condescending. Like, it's like, oh, yeah, no, you guys are the real heroes here. You mean it. Like, we mean it. It's
Oh, for
true.
sure. I mean, what they are doing and what they're accomplishing and the amount of emotion and the movement that they're getting, um, from a heart, from an emotional aspect is way beyond. I mean, I will tell most people I'll tear up when the first runner finishes, and I'll tear up when the last runner finishes, and all in between, because everybody's got such unique and amazing stories. And I think that's one of the greatest things about this podcast is we understand that nobody has the exact same blueprint to get them to that finish line. Somebody might have been injured for a bulk of the training. Somebody might have, unfortunately had a death in the family, but whatever it is had brought them to that moment. And it's such a powerful thing to see somebody cross a finish line. And then ultimately, I think that's the greatest thing about our sport is it's inclusive. I mean, it's about as inclusive as you can be. I mean, I'm never going to go, stand on a NFL football field and line up with somebody, but I can line up next to the local elites or run on the same trail or around the same lake as them. And I think that's the cool thing about our sport is that we're all in it together, and we're all dealt the same hand on that same given day. Some of us with tummy issues, some not. But
now I am sorry because I did derail you answering the question I had about if you were to, go back to training. So take a rest day.
Take a rest day for sure.
How would you deal? Like thinking, obviously, this is totally hypothetical. Thinking about your life now, if you were to drop your training into your life right now, you'd probably have to do a little bit of pruning, a little bit of scaling back.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's only so many buckets. I mean, I'd probably have to send my wife on a nice weekly massage or something just to pay dividends. She's been really phenomenal with all the boards that I've been on. But yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately we're sitting here talking about sleep, and I think the first thing that I'd probably do would be, I'd have to get up earlier and just get it done before the day gets started and be a contributing factor to our family. The hard part about it probably would not be so much getting the training in. It would just be, how tired we are when we're doing that training. And so how active or interactive am I with my kids at the end of the day, and what are we doing on a social, a social planning level to support our friendships and our kids and their friendships. And that's probably the biggest thing that I think would be hard. I'm one of those people. It's like, all right, I'll make up my mind if I'm going to do it. I'll get up at 3:30 in the morning and do it. But it's probably just where do I pull from there, and how do I make it work in accordance. But for sure, I think recovery is a big thing now that I'm at this age. Nutrition would probably be a little bit more. I wouldn't be able to finish my kids yummy lasagna, that they don't finish or something like that. But trying to work on those aspects, I think, would be really difficult at this point.
And finally, I know we touched on this briefly. We talked about sleeping during the taper, but sleep leading up to race day, especially for athletes who experience a lot of pre-race anxiety, that's a tough one. And then if you're already anxious about not getting enough sleep, and then the night before the race, you barely sleep at all, whether or not you're wearable, whatever it says, doesn't matter. That's not a great feeling to have. Did you ever struggle with that leading up to big events?
I did. I mean, I think a lot of times you kind of get in your head and you get very excited, but I always went by the rule that, 2 nights before the event is actually the most magical amount of sleep you should be getting, because we understand that most of the time nerves will get in the way. And so, that night before it is important, if not just as important, but really 2 nights out, trying to make sure that you're getting the sleep you need. Just so that, again, if you lose a little sleep on the night before, you're okay. And most of the races, logistics of it really factor into how much sleep you're going to get. Are you getting up at New York? Are you getting up early to go? Get on
in the morning.
Exactly. Those things are one of those factors you just you just never know. But I think being, as intentional as you can about everything. And so whether that be 2 nights out, you set out your kit and you got everything there, you got your bag of energy and you got your hydration, and it's all there ready to go. Because if you're like me on your first marathon and you show up to the starting line, you're like, hey, that little tag you put around the shoe, I don't have it. That can be problematic. So fortunately, we don't have to worry about those little tags you tie on the shoelaces anymore. But I think trying to get in bed and trying to set that routine, like we talked about earlier, whether that be getting away from your phones and trying to get away from some of the stressors, and just go over your race plan. I mean, that's all we have, really, to worry about is, what's the race plan? What are my options A, my option B, my option C? And, the greatest thing is there are a lot of races out there. And so I think that, unfortunately, if a race doesn't go your way, I've seen so many people find another race, whether that be weather or stomach or sleep, and know that there are definitely other options that you can fall back on if you're so inclined. And, you're going to make it work. You put in all this work, you definitely have a high work ethic if you made it to that point. So, I think that's a big thing to understand, is that there are other options out there if you need to reassess at that race.
I want to ask one follow-up question to that, because that you just saying that reminded me of something that I've noticed in that runners I've spoken to who ran competitively through college. They ran high school or ran in college, who have the experience of hundreds, if not thousands, of events over your lifetime, tend to have a lot more of that it's going to be okay, there's always another race attitude, more than people like me who started running as an adult, where, my lifetime race total, quote unquote, is like maybe 50 races total. I didn't run in school. And so each race feels like more precious and more singular. And yes, there's always another race, but I feel like sometimes people who started running as an adult hold on a little bit too tightly to our race days sometimes. Have you noticed that?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I think, I agree with you what you're saying. And I think it's a really good way to point that out. We put an option A on the pedestal and we say we have to be 100%, and we give no deviation to that. But I think the biggest thing to realize is every race is just another opportunity for you to learn a little bit more about yourself and what works and what doesn't work. And sometimes you're gonna hit something and you're gonna be like, oh yeah, I got to continue to do that. And sometimes you're gonna do something and you're gonna be like, that is never gonna be in my routine again. And I think that's an important part to it. And in college, mid-season, that was just drilled into us, is the ability to understand, hey, if you use a race for a certain for a certain thing, to learn a little bit about what you can do, if you can go out early, and if you need to conserve a little bit for the end. And some races you'd fall apart, and some races you wouldn't. But you don't know until you take that leap of faith, and that was the biggest thing. I'll always remember University of Miami, as a true freshman. Coach took us out there and was trying to get all the distance people to do the 1500. And I was like, Coach, I don't have speed. You got me running the 10K at Penn Relays in 2 weeks. Like, please don't put me in the 1500. Like, I will pull a hammy. I will do whatever you need. Just don't put me in the 1500. And so after a long time of complaining and begging, he put me in the 3K. And it was one of the last events. But he was like, hey, I'll let you do this, but you gotta do a tempo beforehand. Like, this is a whole workout situation. And I was like, all right, thank you so much, Coach. Like, whatever you say. And so I'm out doing this, tempo through campus, and I come back to the track, and I'm sitting down, putting on my shoes, and he runs up to me. He's like, they are lining up for this race. Like, they didn't have as many people in the 200 that they thought they would, but you better be at that line. And so here I am sprinting down the back 100 to make it to the start. But it just really kind of showed you that in college, any race that you did was just was a bigger piece of the pie. Because at the end of the season was when you got into conference and nationals, those are really the races that mattered. And so, learning a little bit about yourself at a local, at a 5K or a 10K or a half before you hit that big race that you have. And then also understanding, yes, in college, you have to be dialed in at conference, you have to be dialed in at nationals. But in road racing, the greatest thing is, you're only a few days away from the next full marathon if you're willing to travel. And I've had, I had one of my good friends here. She qualified for Olympic trials. She ran 16 miles of a race that was not great weather, and she decided to pull out. And she regathered herself, looked for another race, and ran the Olympic trials 6 days later. And so we're not all in that situation, but I think we understand that, you got to give yourself a little bit of grace when it comes to those things, and just use it as, use it as another lesson, because it's a marathon is marathon. If I know one thing, it'll teach you a lesson. And you might like some, you might not like others, but that's what we're all here for.
I thought you were going to tell me the story that ended with your coach still putting you in the 1500. Thank goodness.
I don't know how I won that one, but he was. It was probably the best decision.
Logan, thank you so much for being here today. It's always fun to talk to somebody else, especially somebody like you who's done so much and continues to do so much for running and the running community. And if people are interested in learning more about you, where can they do that?
Through my website, and also, like we said, if they want to come down to BMW Dallas Marathon in December, I'll be hanging around the expo all weekend, and we get to see them there. We got kids races, we got a mile Friday night run, we got a 5K, 10K, all the way up to half full ultra.
What do you think is the best part of the course, of any of the courses that you have?
I think our start-finish structure is second to none in the country. I mean, I've obviously been to a lot of them. Boston is amazing. New York's amazing, but we do this huge TV screen, and we've got cameras going all through the crowd, and so you get to see each other. But I think that start-finish structure, because we leverage that same area, so a 5K, 10K person gets the same experience as somebody that's running the full or the ultra or the half on Sunday. So that's a cool thing, I think.
That's very cool. Well, I'll have to see it for myself in person someday.
We look forward to having you down here.
Well, like I said, Dr. Logan Sherman, thank you so much for being here today. If you'd like to learn more about Logan and his work, all those links will be in the show notes. And I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for doing this podcast. It's really, I've like I said earlier before we got into the recording, I've listened to this since 2022, and it just it's been a nice breath of fresh air for the running community.
Well, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely.